Okay, so a couple things we're going to talk about here, and that is I'm going to do one more resim and adjust my glue setup because I don't like this chunk here. This sort of kind of draws attention to itself to a certain degree. So you can see it's like, okay, there's this reality here of this piece that kind of seems odd. Like, why would that piece fall through, yet this whole brick wouldn't fall through, right? So again, that's something we're probably going to play with a little bit. The other thing I'm going to be doing is adding a texture to this because you can see it looks like volcanic rock polished or something, and getting that in there. So breaking it up with a roughness map, laying out the UVs for the inside or interior pieces is going to be something we're going to be doing. So we'll be doing a little UV work. The key is to make sure that when you do the UV work that you actually make sure you don't do it after the fact. So if I were to actually lay out the UV work after the file merge, that would not be really smart. And the reason being for that is that it's going to be laying out the UVs for every baked out BGO node that's loading up. And hence you'll get an artifact very similar to this. If you take a look very carefully, you can see the animation of the UVs after the fact. So the ordering isn't very important here. So you can see, take a look right here. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be adding this sort of like cracked texture here, but again, you do not want to add this UV stuff post actual transformations or simulations. You can see it? See right there? So the first thing I'm going to do is resim this here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back to frame 0. And I'll turn this off so we're not rendering anymore. And let's go ahead and I'm going to get, this is something you got to get used to, is just resimming. Wait until you get a good look, because again, this is going to play a part in your sim all the way through. So I'm going to go back here, come back to the wall. The first thing I'm going to do is come over here to my, just kind of take a look at my connections here and connect adjacent. And I'm going to take the search radius up a little bit so that there's going to be a little bit more. I think I'll add this to 4 so that it'll grab a hold of and kind of contain that piece so it doesn't kind of pull out. And let's kind of just go down our pipeline here and see what we can figure out that we can kind of play with. The other thing I want to do is maybe add a couple more shards of division here. So I'm going to come to my Voronoi scatter here, and let's go ahead and just up this to maybe 650 points here, because I'm still seeing very large shards here. Now again, you can come in here and do a cluster, but I think the clusters might be a little bit too big. I can change the scale of the clustering, which is a good idea, but at this current moment I'm not going to worry too much about that. So again, if I put my viewer to the assemble node here, and actually let's go to the explode view here, let's visualize this, just see what we get. So we get these nice small chunks. Again, you can kind of play, if you want to, you can try to come back here to the Voronoi and set up cluster pieces here. So if we do the cluster pieces, you're going to see quite a change here in this, which is going to start combining these pieces. And again, you're going to get a less count on your pack geometry, so you can see what happened there. It combined a couple pieces here, so like this piece right here. But again, the danger of this is, it's just the danger of clustering is just the fact that you get bigger pieces. And again, you can adjust that with the size here. So if you scale this down or up, you're basically defining the size that the items can cluster. So again, I'll turn off cluster pieces and see what it looks like without the cluster. And see there'll be tinier pieces in here. But again, you get more of an organic look. It's less round. It can be more like, figure eights, pieces like that. Let's try cluster pieces and just see what we get. Again, I can always put the scale down. I'll just give it a second there to calculate. There we go. So we're getting bigger pieces, yes. So just be aware of that. Okay, so moving on down here. This is where we're going to start to put in the actual layout for the UVs. So before the attribute wrangler node is probably a good place to start. So what I'm going to do is bring in a UV, And let's do a UV project. And we're going to go ahead and throw that right there. In this case, I'm going to make sure that with the UV project, the group that I'm projecting is going to be the inside pieces, as you can see here. And you can see we got a 0 to 1 range here, but I only want to do the inside pieces. And we're going to go ahead and do a projection of a polar. So that's almost like spherical mapping if you're familiar with other setups on this. So in order to see this, we're going to go ahead and put this to a 2-split view side by side. And I'm going to come in here. You can see I have this set to UV mode. You can just put this to UVs. Now you're going to see the combination of the pieces that have been kind of projected out. They haven't been laid out yet. And then you have the UVs of also the geometry of the outside, which is this here, which we don't want to change. So if you want to see this for the sake of preview, you can put a blast node in and put your viewer to it. I'll put this here. I'm going to make sure I blast out the outside group. So let's go ahead and blast it out. So now you can see the pieces of the geometry by themselves. This is a nice little tool to get stuff out of the way. You can kind of see what it looks like. You see right now these are the inside pieces. So what I'm going to do next is do a UV. And let's go ahead and do a UV layout. So I'm going to lay out those automatically set in UVs. So I'll go ahead and plug that in right there. And what you're going to see is a layout. Should lay it out in the 0 to 1 space. You'll see it kind of lay out in this area here. Now, question is there enough resolution there for that? So we're going to go ahead and set this to fixed scale. This is going to propagate the data to multiple UV spaces. Now the same image that we're going to put here, which is going to be a cracked surface, we'll go through all of these. I'm going to put the scale up to 2. This is going to really spread these out and get the size of these a little bit bigger. So you can see what we've done. We kind of built these out for a layout that is nice and big. Some are bigger than others, way bigger than others, but you're getting a maximum reality there. So with that said, obviously we don't need the blast node anymore, so we're going to bypass this UV layout through. And then last but not least, it's always good to put a rest node, which sort of rests the points. So a rest position, we'll go ahead and throw that down right there. And we should be good. So again, what we're going to do is simulate this out now and get to frame 84 again. And we should be good. So again, I'll put this back to, let's go back to our final here. And put this to assemble here. So you can see we got our pieces again. So I'll put this back. Okay, so let's just go ahead and sim this. Let's see what we got. So I'll just go ahead and put myself through to my camera again. And we can put this view back to single view. And let's go ahead and play it through and see the magic and see what happens here. So as you can see, we got some big fat chunks that come in. I think the chunk sizes are still relatively the same. But again, we're getting these interesting shapes that are not, they're figure eights. They're not small, tiny baby chunks. And again, you can kind of play with the sizing and so forth with the scatter to make the pieces bigger or smaller. As you can see here, this is... you can just play with it a little bit too, and then also, I might have those angles a little bit too extreme. As you can see, we have this almost has like an alien of 1970s rock formations. As like H.R. Geiger style rock formations. On a planetoid. It still feels slightly volcanic. Again, I'm keeping an eye to make sure none of these pieces are intersecting Jack. One of the things I could have done is put a stand-in geo for Jack and have it bounce off him, but obviously that would kill him in real life or squash his toes. So I just got to watch out where these pieces are flying, because they fly through Jack's head. It's gonna tip the audience off. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit pause. So I've stopped at frame 98. Again, you can see I have this piece here that's still giving me issues. It'd be nice to get this one gone, but I think I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and jump over to the render view here. And we're going to go ahead and render this and see what we got. And we're going to start to work on the actual material setup. Just going to play that through. There we go. Alright, so we're getting some weird artifact here. I'm not sure what that is. That is interesting. That is interesting indeed. Let's see what we got here. I'll go ahead and hit the stop button here. Let's see if we got the geometry is looking strange. Doesn't look strange at all. There might be a UV layout issue. I don't know. We're going to find out here. Maybe you got to reassign the materials or something. So maybe if I scrub one frame back, let's see if that might update it. It might be an update issue as we propagate from the wall sim to the wall render. So I went back to frame 1, and as you can see, complete mayhem here. So something's going on. Oh, I know what happened. Oh, this is a common mistake. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the wall here. If you haven't noticed, when we did the UV layout, we forgot to choose only the group. So again, I'll come over here and choose the inside group. So I bet that'll probably fix it. It went and laid out the UVs again on this geometry. So I bet if I give us a second to render here, you're going to find that everything should be okay. We'll see. Magic, magic. And did it fix it? Yes, it did fix it. So you can see all the fun that goes into this, where you kind of do something and go, what happened? So anyway, that did it. Okay, so let's go ahead and sim this again. So I'll go ahead and stop this. Stop. Back to my scene view here and hit play. Ooh, hold on a second. We got to go back to object level. There we go. And I'll go ahead and hit play. And again, we'll let it sim, get a cup of coffee, and get our way up to roughly around frame 82. We're going to be talking about what makes things look photoreal. I talked about it before, specularity. Specularity is the key to photorealism. Best movie to reference this is Blade Runner 2049. An amazing film, absolutely incredible film. Framestore is the company that did some of the VFX for it. I think I talked about that. And ironically, it was funny, I went for a job interview at Framestore around the time they were working on Blade Runner. And they couldn't tell me what they were working on, but they needed a whole bunch of people for their new Chicago office. And it was an amazing interview. The people there were incredible. They were just starting. They were just keeping the place. They're just setting it up, actually, I should say. And about 2 days before the date that I was scheduled to work, because I was put on hold, I was like, what's going on? Why is there no one calling me or saying get ready, you know? Because literally it was like a month and a half, 2 months before we started. And so I gave the producer a ring and I said, hey, what's going on? And she's like, oh, by the way, you know, I'm like, were you going to call me? So, yeah, she basically said the job was canceled and the work was moved to the New York and LA office. So it was the biggest bummer I think I heard in my life. I think I felt down for like 2 straight days. I was so jazzed about working there, and then that kind of fell through. Okay, so that's looking a lot better. So again, the specularity is uniform. You can see it has this kind of shiny rock surface. There's no bumpiness. Another thing we'll add is a roughness pass to this wall here, a slight roughness pass. I would add a bump map, maybe for these divots here, just to try to break up this whole image so it doesn't look like a mirror. As you can see here, these pieces are pretty perfect. If I go ahead and let this render, there's no difference in roughness mapping here. So that kind of makes you go a little bit irked. But in general, it's looking pretty good. We got nice chunks in here. Again, I'm a little not too happy about this piece, but I think, you know, for demonstration purposes, it should definitely suffice. So again, we're going to be working on all of this, and let's do that now. So I'll jump into the wall render. And again, the DOP import's coming through here. as you can see. And then we got our blast, and we got our attribute wrangler, and here is our material. So this is assigning the material to what we have. So let's go ahead and make adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop for a minute here, go over to our materials palette and take a look at our clay. So the clay, as you can see, the color is this color, and we also have roughness here. So what I'm going to do is come over here to textures, and I'm going to click on let's see here, let's try a roughness pass here. And we're going to go ahead and plug in, go to hip here and go to my reference. I have this image here that is a tiled cracked JPEG. So I'll go ahead and click on that. Oh, I'm sorry, tiled cracked roughness is what we want for roughness. So there we go. And that should do it. And if we go over to bump and normal, I'm going to enable that. I'm going to turn this to a bump map. And for the texture path, we're going to go ahead and just choose tile cracked. Okay. And for the principled shader, which is the outside, let's go ahead and jump over to that. I'm going to come over here under texture and use a texture for roughness, and I have created a final wall roughness. Go ahead and click on that. So let's take a look at these in Photoshop. So this is a tiled or tileable texture here, not really too impressive. This will be the setup for the bump map. Again, the black areas will go low and the white areas will pop out. This I kind of made a little bit brighter and made it the roughness because this should be, the interior should be pretty rough and not shiny. So it's like a copied version of this for the roughness of the inside. And now here is the original texture we painted, and here is a color corrected version, very, very heavily bright values here because I don't want it to be black in certain areas because it'll actually give me a weird result. This will kind of help break up the setup here without changing the texture too much. So now that we've incorporated all of these, we're going to start tweaking the roughness settings and so forth and the bump map settings here. So again, I'm just going to switch this back to render here, and now you're going to see this whole thing come to life. Let's first start out with the clay material here, which is the interior, and just give that a couple seconds to render there. There we go. So again, I'll just kind of scrub my left mouse button here, and already you can start to see the nice details that are showing up here. Kind of take a look, we're getting a kind of streaky effect. When you get salt and pepper, when things get look a little crunchy, you want to definitely bring down your effect scale. So I'm going to bring that down, and that'll lessen the bump map, and we'll get just the ever so slight look of, you know, something in there. Okay, now again, it's still very shiny. You can see it here. I'm going to go ahead and come back to the surface color here, and I'm going to take the base color, and I'm going to start to dial down the value a little bit because I still think these rocks are way too bright. And it's going to be a night and day value here on the interior rock pieces here, so I got to be very careful not to push this too much. Eventually, these rock pieces I'm going to brighten them up in color correction in post, so I want them relatively settled down here. Whoops, whoa, see how the difference it goes in 2 seconds? So there we go. So now we're getting a nice interior. Again, I'm just scrubbing the areas I want to render. And we got a nice roughness, so it's broken up pretty good. And I'm going to go over to my let's go over here to my texture here, and I think we're good. Okay, so I'm going to go jump over to principled shader. This is the outside, and I'll come back to the surface here. Actually, you know what? Let's go back to clay real quick, and I just want to take that roughness and amp it up a little bit more. I still think it's too shiny. Don't lose the shininess, like I said. Blade Runner 2049. The introduction of specularity is needed. It's desperately needed. Otherwise, it's painting-esque, as I showed you earlier. So I can kind of drag this up in a little bit, and you want to get little hints of highlights on here, but you don't want to have this look like it's, again, Looney Tunes, no specularity, you know. So the ever so slight reality, there we go. So you can see a little bit of highlights there. So again, back to the principled shader, you can see the pieces that are the flat pieces here. We can go ahead and maybe adjust the roughness here a little bit and see how that's affecting these pieces here. And I think that's probably good enough. So I'm liking this a lot. I'm just still not happy with this area. I also don't like this angle here. You can see it's kind of bugging me a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do is, without a doubt, do one more sim. Why not? All the goodies are set up in here, and then we'll do the bake. So at this point, we're ready to. Again, I'll just hit the stop button here. I'm going to head back to the start, and let's go ahead and just make a couple more adjustments. Come back here to my out. Oops. Come over here to my object mode. Go back into the wall. I think what I'll do is, let's see here. I want to visualize these pieces one last time and take a look. The normals here might be a little bit too sharp too. That could be another issue. There's a lot of stuff that plays a part in this. Let's go ahead and just come over here. There we go. So again, I'll just come over here, take a look. And again, a good way to judge the normals issues on these is to make sure wireframe on shaded is off. You can actually come to just the plain exploded view, and then you could start to see the realities of the setup here. So these are relatively shiny right now, but when they finally receive their material, you can see how reflective and chromy these things are right now. Okay, but you can see these edges right here are what's giving a lot of our weird artifacts here. Now, if I go to my normals here for my inside, right, I can start pumping this up, and that should help resolve those issues. But it also makes the pieces look a little too round. So there's a balance between bringing this cusp angle back. Let's give it a go here. You can see if I take this thing and bring it back to say 14, you know, we're starting to get this crunchy look, which might help. You know, the sweet spot commonly is a 30 degree, but I don't want triangles in my renders, obviously. So again, we can kind of play around with it a little bit. So we could take a look at 30. You know, how does 30 look in comparison? It's going to get a little bit more crunchy, a little bit hard edged, but sometimes that's how pieces look. So again, I'll leave it. Let's try 31 and see how that looks. Okay. And again, you can also come over here and play with your setups that we did in regards to displacement. So if we take a look at our distort interior here again, and we can take a look at our frequency. We can take a look at our min amp here. So the max amp, I can go ahead and crank that down a little bit. That'll make less displacement, or I can pump it up and put in more. So you can try to do a balancing act here. See if we can kind of get something that, yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm still not happy with these hard edges. Again, you can come back to the normals here. You can see the normals for the inside. If I crank that up to 88, that's going to resolve those issues right there. You don't want to go too crazy with this. Let's see here. Let's see if I can. Let's just do a render. Let's play a little here. I'll go with 84 degrees. That kind of cleaned up the edges, and hopefully our bump map will take care of most of the issues. And then finally, last but not least, let's come back here to my scatter, and I'll kind of crank this up a little bit more to, let's go 800. Why not, huh? So it's going to create more chunks. I believe we still have our clusters on, so I'll just give that a second. And there we go. So now these are our clustered points. They're a little bit smaller, but you can see the variety that we have here now. Our divisions are more organic. Everything just feels right. And I think for a good measure, I'm going to come down here to the connect adjacent here. And let's go ahead and take a look at our connect adjacent here. And I think I'm going to lessen that search radius a little bit. I just want this stuff, that problem child area is like right there. And I'm just going to loosen. I don't know. It's 50-50 on this. Just get a little bit of this and max connections. Let's just play around. Let's see what 3 does, right? Again, this is so much of what simulation. It's not just an in-out fix. You got to actually take the time and do this. So I'm going to go ahead and back this. I'm already backed up, I should say. So I'm going to pop out. And we're going to sim it and see what it looks like. So once again, switch to the camera. And just go ahead and hit play and see what we get. Let it run through, stop it, render a frame, make adjustments to the texture, make adjustments back into the wall, and just keep doing it until you get something that looks good, and then commit to a bake. We want to commit to a bake. And then we bake this, and again, what these pieces will look like will determine the pieces that we create later down the line as smaller pieces that will emit from the final piece here. So wow, we get some pieces that go very near Jack, by the way. They fly kind of over in this corner. But you can see the chunks are a little bit smaller now. So we're getting smaller pieces. And again, I can go ahead and just hit stop here really quick. And just do a quick render and to see what we're getting. So again, I'll pop over to render. Rendering through camera. Hit the render button. And again, beforehand we had these sharp edges. Let's see what we get now. There we go. So we're getting more of a feel of organic cuttery here. It's definitely feeling good. Let's take a look at these pieces. We're still getting, actually not too bad at all, actually. Wow, that's looking really nice. We're getting those nice shapes in there. Again, you can make your own texture map. You don't have to use mine. These pieces are looking rather interesting. It could be a little too smooth since I smooth the angle pretty intensely. So you might look at this and go, wow, that looks like a polished rock, right? So that's one version of it. I'm going to go ahead and stop this and back it up again. And we'll go in and let's change that angle for the inside. Let's put that back to 30 real quick. I just want to see what 30 looks like. And once again, we can resim this. So again, just pop out, play through. And I'll just wait for these pieces to land on the ground. You can see they have a more rough look to them as you change the normals angle to around 30. 30 has always been a good mid-ground between soft and hard normals. But again, you could introduce yourself into faceting. But again, this has just been broken off, and you should see really nasty rough edges. I actually had a tooth that accidentally chipped, and of course, if you do that, it creates a roughness feel to it because it was just basically broken up, and it's not polished or nothing. So of course, it's going to be very rough, and it's going to look like this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop here. And again, I don't have any weird like divots in here where there's a big cavity that comes up. And let's go ahead and just render this and see what we get. Okay, so this is looking good. Now remember, we don't have the small pieces in here yet, so don't freak out yet. But in general, we're getting these nice like L-shaped pieces from the clustering. It's feeling good. So you can adjust whatever you prefer, and this should do the trick, so to speak. So with that said, let's go ahead and bake this out. So I'll hit stop. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my wall render here. And I will bring my animation back here to the beginning. And we are ready to bake this out. So I'll go ahead and take this to here. So again, we'll just go ahead and click on this little render button here and hit render. And go get a cup of coffee. So in the next lesson, I'll just show you not obviously a render, but actually we'll just go and do a flipbook and see what we have. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at our setup here. This is looking good. We got nice organic pieces. You know, got some big chunks. This guy slips a little bit, but I don't mind him. Always look at these sims and look for any weird anomalies or anything that might kind of catch your attention. In general, it looks really good. I'm pretty happy with this. Keep an eye out these pieces that go right by Jack. I think Jack might have been hit in the head here, if that's the case. It's pretty close, as you can see. So I don't know. We're just gonna let it fly for now. Again, this is all for learning's sake. Okay, so with that said, I just want to talk about the fact that we just pumped out our big shards, and now we're going to do, this is a three-step process. Now we're going to do the smaller shards, which are instances of the big shards, but smaller, and then finally smoke. So this, as you can imagine, was a lot of fun. This one, I'm going to shotgun you through relatively fast. You may not completely understand all of the coding that we're about to do with wranglers and so forth, but that's okay. And this is a great way of making a quick, randomization of transforms of what the big shards are to make smaller shards. Okay, so this is a really fun technique. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you right now. I'm just going to close both of these here. Okay, so obviously what I did here with the file merge here, we baked it out of the romp geometry. On the file merge, I went ahead and repathed this geometry. In this case, it's less than 21n geometry. So that is currently being played. So if I go ahead and play it through, it looks good. And one thing you'll notice if you go into your player here, if you have like hardware texturing on here, if you have just a normal lighting, you'll know if them maps are changing on here, because you'll see like flickering going on in here, even in this M-Player flipbook. So you'll know if your UVs are screwed up. We talked about not having post UVs after the transformations, or the simulations, I should say. So you can, if you just scrub, you'll see weird flickering. That'll give you the clue. So before you render the whole thing out, you're like, oh crap. So anyway, so we got that, and we can just pop out here. So that has taken care of the big wall leap process here. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down a little bit. And now comes the fun part where we get into debris. So I'm just going to take this wall texture and make this my source. Okay, and again, I'll put myself back to frame 0. Always a good idea to start frame 0. And we're going to come over here, and I believe it's under rigid body, if I'm not mistaken. There it is. So if you go to under here and hit debris with this selected, this wall texture here, give it a couple seconds. Bada boom. It'll bring you into a debris sim. So let's jump out of this. Okay. And back up a little bit. So here we have the debris source. This is very similar to what we did up here. So let's just go ahead and drag this over, right? You can see it is once again another DOP network. So we put this in order. So I'll usually do, debris source, and then here's the debris sim, and then we've got the debris. Okay, so this is what's getting rendered. This is the piece of this is, the main source. This is the actual simulation. This right here is the actual, what's actually getting rendered. So these are both turned off. Okay, so I'm going to grab this again, keep this organized, and set up an actual network. And again, give it a fancy color if you want to. So let's go to our color palette here. Maybe give this a dark green color. And I'll call this like smaller shards. Keep it nice and organized. Turn this thing off and go like this. Now, the way I like to usually do this is create a tier. So you can see this is like a tier indentation, a tier. So I know this is going to be, this is feeding off this, which feeds off this, and so forth. Okay, so let's jump into this. The first thing we're going to do is jump into the debris sim. Actually, let's go ahead and I'll just back off a little bit here. And there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and let's jump into the debris sim and just take a look and see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play and just see what we see. So you can see it's taking a little bit of time here. This is reading off of the source, and the source is basically what we created. Just give it a second here. So obviously when we get around frame 21, we get a combination of two different particles being created. We have these blue particles, and we have these kind of blackish grayish particles. Okay, so I'll just let this cache all the way through so we can just see what it is at first. And the big thing that's happening here is this is emitting way too many points, and that's why it's taking forever to be bogged down here. Let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and stop here for a minute. So what's going on here? What is happening, if we kind of take a look here, is these blue points are basically emitting from the interior pieces of our geometry, obviously upon simulation, and they're emitting out like this, basically coming through. So the blue is the emitters, and the actual black here or gray are the actual particle pieces. Each one of these little gray pieces, not the blue pieces, but the gray pieces, will be replaced with one of the many shards of our high or large scale rocks that we created just earlier. So every instance, if you don't know what an instance is, it's basically replacing each one of these dots. So obviously we don't need a million rocks in our scene. We only need a few. So I'm going to go to my pop solve here. And as you can see, the setup here is object debris source out. So if I come over here to the birth option, we're going to make a couple changes here. This constant birth rate is basically telling us here, you can see number of particles to emit per second. So we're pumping out 5,000 particles per second. I'm going to put that to 0. And the constant activation, I'm going to set that to 0, so it's not constantly activating. The impulse count is going to be how many spurts, so we're going to put that to 20. So for the impulse activation, we're going to set up a script. So I'm going to go ahead and click on here, and I'm going to type in if parentheses $frame ff. If the frame is less than 50, okay, and frame 50 is about the time that we want these rocks to basically stop. We want these blue points, which are emitters, which are attached to the rocks, to stop emitting. At around frame 50, that's when things seem relatively rested. We don't want to have any more rocks sort of being created, because once this thing was impacted, the rock should have, sharded up and busted up pretty good. So basically, any frame, if it's less than 50, okay. Go ahead and put parentheses. Oops. Have it on, so comma 1, and then comma 0. Otherwise, have off, which is 0. Okay. So from frames 0 to 50, it's going to be emitting rocks. It's actually going to start obviously emitting only when it's created, which is around this frame. So you're going to see rocks spewing out from their emitters, the blue points, which will create these black points. And then when we get to about frame 50, it's going to stop emitting the points. Okay, so let's go ahead and just throw that in. And in that, it's going to basically, as you can see, number of particles emitting each time it cooks. Okay, impulse activation. So again, we're going to get a significantly less amount of points here. So let's go ahead and play this through and play it back. You can see it's capturing a lot quicker now. Now the other thing you'll notice, these rocks go straight through the ground here. They don't have any sort of collision objects whatsoever. So right at that point, everything kind of ends. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop and rewind again. And that may be a lot of points, actually. So we'll see. You might look at this and go, that doesn't look like a lot. But if you take a look at any one of these points, each one of these points is going to be a rock. So we're going to have a crap load of rocks in here. So with that said, let's go ahead and set up some actual collision objects. So we will go ahead and do that. So the way to quickly do that without killing ourselves is to steal. So I'm going to come over here to the wall sim, and I'm going to go ahead and grab these guys here. I obviously don't need my ball. I just need these 3 pieces here. And I'll copy those, and I will pop over here to Object, and go back to Debris Sim, and just paste those puppies in. Now there's an oddity to these 3 pieces, and let me just show you what I mean by that. If you take a look here, you have, let's see, I believe it's under RBD Solver here. So go to RBD Solver. So collisions are RBD Solver here. You have this option here, which is collision detection. And you want to use surface collision, otherwise it won't work. So each one of these guys, you got to come in here and set this to surface collision, specifically for particles. For some reason, I don't know why, but it seems to just go through the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and do a merge, and we will merge these guys in. So I'll just drag them one at a time. Left affecting right is the default here. You could also set this to mutual if you wish, which will just have them all affect each other. And then finally, so these left 3 pieces will affect the right. And we'll put our merge to that. And now if I go ahead and hit play, now you can see we get something going on here. So obviously it's slowing down. Now, question is, after we're going to let this cache, but you look at the simulation and kind of go, gee, these pieces don't have much friction, there's not much movement there. Then we can start to affect the friction options here inside the static objects. We had friction options different for our big rocks because we don't want them sliding around like hockey pucks. But in this case, here I'll go ahead and hit stop here and scrub for what we have. So you can see pieces fall. Take it from an angle here, but they don't actually bounce. They just sort of like litter and sit. It means the pieces are really heavy. Be nice to see a little bit of bounce, wouldn't it? So let's go ahead and kind of play with that. So this is the object right here. As you can see, this is our contact floor. I'm going to come over here to the physical, and the bounces I'm going to put at probably about 0.07. I want a little bit of bounce. And friction settings are good, so let's go ahead and just play it through and see if we get a little bit more bounce there. Yeah, you see a little bit of bounce? It's real subtle, but it is there. I'll just go ahead and just play this through here. So you can see if I scrub it, see a little bit of bounce on those guys, a little bit, just a touch. One thing you'll find is sometimes these points will actually keep moving, and what I find is that this pop interaction here, you want to disable this. It comes with the package when you create it, so turn off pop interaction. The other thing I want you to be aware of lifespan too. You can see these pieces are still existing, but if you go to your pop source here, you do have a life expectancy with a life variation. So you can randomize that a little bit, but say if you wanted the pieces to only have a lifespan of like, I don't know, 5 frames, whatever, you could put 5 frames in, and then these should disappear. So I'll put this back to 5 and play it through. And I think we should see, maybe it's 5 seconds. They should disappear eventually. Let's go down to 1. Let's go on like the 0.8 here and see if that helps. I think it might be the fact that, yeah, I'm not sure. This might be an issue. But anyway, I just keep it at 100 as best I can here. But obviously we want these pieces to continue to exist and as we go through the simulation here. So we're going to go ahead and create a null node here. And of course this is the null. We'll just call this the out particles. And we can put our viewer to it. And let's just go ahead and cache these for what we have. It's going to take some time, obviously, just to let these settle. Again, this might be a heavy number. We might have to take our size to, or our amount to from 20 maybe to 10 or something. So we'll see how many rocks we create from this. Okay, so you can see here is our simulation. You can see the pieces coming down. I want to make you aware that what we're going to do eventually as we move down the pipe into the render node is that we're going to replace all of these dots with actual geometry. Now, what you don't see here is that these stupid static objects, that dumb bug I talked about earlier, it's being merged in here. Just like we had that issue with the merge, we had to blast these out at the render node. We're going to have to blast these out again because otherwise each individual vertice of these static objects will actually create an instance of a shard or a rock, and we don't want that. So just to keep in mind that there is a bug here when we merge this. We'll have to blast these three items out as we kind of move down the pipe. So now we can go ahead and pop out of object mode, and you can see our sim running through with our pieces together. Not exactly the fastest, but I'll just go ahead and kind of scrub over here and see if we can see what we can see here. And again, the amount of 20 might be a little bit high, but you can see there's the pieces that are flying. And then on the floor scatters a series of little chunks, as you can see here. Okay, so let's jump into our debris because that's what's rendering. Obviously this is going into here, this is referencing into this. So I'm going to go ahead and pop into this right here. And lo and behold, if you currently have this set up so that it says hide other objects, you can see that there's that bug I was talking about. It actually took this geometry with us, which we do not want. So we're going to blast that stuff out because we do not want an instance on every vertice that's on here, a rock. So I'm going to go over here and plug in the blast node, put my viewer to it, and we can go over here and blast out everything that we don't want. So I'm going to choose the island. I'm going to go ahead and choose the stand-in geo, and I'll take the contact ground. There we go. So now again, if we just play this through, you can see we don't see the blue particles anymore. We just see what is going to be rendered, which is going to be these here. Now if you were to render these out at the object level, they'd render out as little tiny spheres. So that's kind of like the starting point for what we do. So now we're going to take each one of these points and do some instancing. So this is where the fun begins, so get ready. Get yourself a cup of coffee. Go ahead and make an attribute wrangler. So I'll go ahead and make an attribute wrangler here. And plug it in. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of things here. Meantime, on this side, we're going to actually create geometry that's going to come in here. Okay, so we will create an object merge. Let's go ahead and... There we go. That object merge, and then I'm going to create a delete key. We'll talk about that in a minute here. We'll make a group copy node. I'll get into that in a minute. And I'll add a transform like that, and another transform. So I'm just laying all these goodies out, so don't freak out. And we'll add a material node right there, because we're going to have to reassign our materials for the inside and outside of our rock shards. And then finally, we're going to add a copy node. So you can see we have all these different options here. We want to do copy, I believe it's copy stamp if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And it should do it. Okay, so for the attribute editor here, attribute wrangler, I'm still stuck in my land here. We're going to set up we're going to create a variable here or data here. So I'm going to make integer. I'm going to call it the max index. Okay. And I'm going to currently put that to the number of points we spewed out, which was 20. So that's usually the variation of the different pieces that we'll kind of put out here. And then I'm going to do debris index is going to equal random, and it's going to take a random point, point number, PTNUM, and I'm going to times that, again, that's shift 8, by the max index that I created, which is currently up there. Okay, so I can go ahead and hit Control Enter there, and whoops, got a mistake here. Always getting that wrong. There we go. Oops. There we go. All right. So this is the max index. It's basically, in this case, it's set to 20. I can change that variable. So this is the max index times a random number here that is going to basically equal what we're going to call a debris index. Okay. So it's basically going to take the shards. The shards have multiple pieces, obviously, right? Like if you remember, and it's going to randomly choose one of those pieces because we want to have unique pieces throughout the whole process of this, and that's what's going to drive on the left-hand side here as we go through and create the instancing. The instancing occurs down here at the copy node. So I'm going to plug this in. It says template to copy of, and for the object merge. Actually, let's move this transform stuff over a little bit here, just for briefly. So for object merge, we are going to merge at a very unique, interesting point. I'm going to go ahead and click Open Operation here, and I'm going to go all the way back to the wall, and I'm going to go all the way back to the Voronoi fracture of the wall. Okay, so this is, if you were to look at the realities here, the fracturing occurs here. Obviously, there's normals that we played with. There's geometry that we fiddled with as far as the edges, but these are small enough pieces that I'm not worried about that as far as the deformations of the edges this is okay to be, relatively crunchy if we want. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this Voronoi fracture, hit accept. And here you can see the Voronoi fracture items. Let me jump out of this smooth wireframe here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the object merge into delete and put that to the delete key. Okay. So it's not going to delete anything unless I tell it what to delete. Okay. So I'm going to go to the object here, and instead of actually dialing in an actual object here for this, oops, there we go. Sorry, wrong setup. Under delete key here, under the group, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this script. So this is a piece stamp. This is going to eventually go to the copy node here, debris index, and then 0. It has to have a 0 here. So basically what this is going to do is create a randomized number. It's going to delete everything but a randomized piece. Okay, so if I hit enter now, let's go ahead and just plug that through there. Should do it. Oops, it's giving me an error message. Piece 0 is not valid piece. So why is that? Well, it's not recognizing the group itself that we're trying to pull from. So what happened was, if you recall, I kept transferring that actual information piece, the word piece, that grouping piece down, or just assigning an actual value for piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over here to my object level and investigate. So I'm going to jump into the wall. And because we created a brand new Voronoi here, you forgot that we have this piece group prefix here. So I'm going to call this piece. Okay, so that's under the groups, under the Voronoi fracture, and now that information is going to transfer through. So it's kind of assigning a group prefix for this. So I'm going to pop back now, jump out. And now jump back into my debris. And now you can see that error message is gone because it's now reading it in. So everything is being referenced in, and this is basically assigning a group to this. So this is bringing in all the geometry in this specific reality. So what I want to do is say delete non-selected. So that actually will give me one shard here, and it's going to randomize different shards throughout this whole process. So kind of keep that in mind as we kind of go through this. Kind of hard to do. Now, one thing is we also want to keep with us, because when we do this, if I hold down this key here, you can see that we will start to lose groupings, and I want to copy over a group. Okay, so in order to do that, you can use these group copies. So it says geometry to copy to, and then geometry to copy from. So what group do I want to keep? Well, I want to keep inside and outside. That's basically the UV layout for my inside outside, so I got to reassign it. So it's taking from here and bringing it over. So we're losing data in this delete, but I want to keep that data coming down the pipeline here because we're going to use it later. Okay, finally I'm going to add a transform to this. So let's go ahead and take a look at the groups here. Okay, and one thing you'll notice if I grab the move tool here, or just kind of take a look at this, the pivot point for this rock is going to be over here. So if we simulate this currently, this rock is going to rotate around this pivot point, which is going to look totally stupid. So we have to actually center the pivot point for the rock and then move it back to the center origin here, so then when it simulates, it's not simulating on an arc. So we're going to go ahead and plug in this first transform. And the first thing is to get the pivot point to the center here. So if I just use my center pivot point, you can see there it is, right? I use this little controller handles. So in order to do that, if you guys are always curious about this, go into the pivot translate here. And you can do $CE, CEX. And again, you can just copy this for each of these. And all you do is just change the variable to X, Y, and Z. So I'll put this to Y. And put this to Z. There we go. And you can do the pivot if you want to. You can do the pivot rotation. I don't know if it really matters. I'm always playing it safe, you know me. Because in case the piece. There we go. So there we go. And we're going to play with the uniform scale here because you can see we don't want these pieces big. Let me put my viewer to the transform here. I want to actually scale them down halfway size and so forth. So for now, I'll leave the scale around 0.52. So that's not it yet. We need to move the piece to the origin. So the way we do that is with another transform node. So you can kind of label this as pivot and resize. And this one will say move to origin. And I'll go ahead and plug that baby in. Put our viewer to it. And a little trick of the trade to pull that off is to come in here and basically take the translate and make an inverse of this. So negative $CEX. Again, for the Y, same thing. And for the Z. Oops. There we go. Should be correct. Looks like there's something off here. Let's see, pivot is there. Got the pivot point. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of that. Now this materials node is basically just a reassigning of our materials, and you're familiar with this, so I'm going to make 2 of these. And then the first, I'll just go ahead and plug it through. And I'm going to go ahead and take this chunk, and for 1, I'm going to set this to the inside, and that's obviously the clay. So the inside is the clay. And again, you could have the outside be the clay as well, if you wish. So I'll do the outside. And if you want, you can choose clay, but I'm just going to choose, just to keep things on the principled shader, which is basically the outside. So it's a reassigning of the goodies, and then finally we come to the copy node, and I'll just drag that in and put our viewer to it. So now you can see we've got rocks, 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 and rocks here. Let's take a look here. So, and again, they're not the form that we made before where they're super high dense. One of the reasons I like to keep them small is in general, you know, as far as poly count, is that they don't like bog the living daylights. Again, if you want to, you can. I could bring that further down the pipeline if you wish when it comes to this DOP import, and choose after we've added all those divisions and so forth. Could you imagine though the poly count on all these pieces? Now you can see this is generally, it still feels very uniform, and it looks like I'm getting an error message here. Let's see, oops, I think I forgot to add a space. Yes, I did. So I forgot to put integer there. There we go. So again, I'll hit Control Enter. And I think that should do it. Yep, it's cleared it up. There we go. Now you'll notice that every piece is exactly the same. So we have to set up that randomization setup inside the copy node. So here is the copy node. And we're going to scrub down here. Actually, go over to the stamp tab. And under attribute stamp, we're going to type in that randomizer, which is debris underscore index. And we are going to turn on stamp inputs and pack geometry before copying. And there you go. So now we have these rocks. They're obviously too big. And if you just wanted to stay with a constant value, you can come over here to this pivot and resize, and I could take the uniform scale and bring that down. But we want to create randomness in the sizes of these pieces, right? So you don't want the same pieces to be the same size or have to double up on this and make twice as many simulations just to get a variation of size. So what we're going to do is add a little bit of variation here. So if I come to my copy node here, we're going to create a variable called scale. So I'm just going to type in scale, and that value is going to be a random number for the point divided by 4. So that's just basically giving us a randomized value divided by 4. You can make this divided by 7 or 8, and it'll change the variation of the size. And now this scale, the actual scale, is going to drive that size. So if we go back to resize here, and we have this uniform scale, we're going to actually type in a script. And let's go ahead and type it in. So it's the stamp itself, .copy 1, which is this node down here. Okay, scale, and then again here 0.5. So you can vary this up if you prefer. You could put 0.5, you know, 0.6, 0.7, and now you can see the variations of scale of size that we have here. Let's go ahead and just kind of poke around here. So look at all the beautiful detail now. Again, you can change this up a little. You can come over here to your copy node. And instead of dividing by 4, you can divide by 2, and that'll make the pieces bigger. As you can see here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this to, let's try something, I don't know, let's try a value of maybe 6. Let's see if we take that. That should shrink the pieces down even more. Again, you could copy and paste this with 2 different specific Houdini files open. I think what I'm going to stick with is a value of maybe 4. Yeah, let's go with 5. 5 sounds like a good round number. So you can see it's even grabbing the clusters that are in here. So it's creating a setup for these, which is kind of cool. Okay, so I think that's good enough. Let's go ahead. I'm going to pop out of this. I'm going to jump out to object level here. Actually, let me go put this back to sim to the beginning here.
and just go to my object level here. And let's go ahead and sim this out. And again, we might have to decrease the number of shards. Again, we need to take a look at this and just see how it looks. So why don't we kill 2 birds with 1 stone and do a flip book and just see what happens. So at this point, once you've cached the particles, they're just replacing the dots with actual points or with the geometry. So it should go relatively quick. So here you can see the little chunkies coming through. And at one time, we want to make sure the materials actually captured over, so you can hit stop and make sure they're rendering not white. If they're rendering white, then obviously the material information didn't make its way down. But I'm pretty confident it did, in my personal opinion. It's always good to check with the render. So here we have these, again, an awesome reality here. We finally have pieces coming through. It's looking really, really good. So I'm going to let this just run through, and then I'll come back. Okay, so here's what we have. I'll go ahead and hit play. So we got a bunch of chunks that fall through. I want you to notice that these chunks are not interacting with this piece of geometry. They are interacting with these 3 pieces of geometry, but not this. They're literally falling through these rocks. Now, in the midst of the action, you're not going to notice it. But if you want to, you could also set up a collision object with an RBD object or whatever. That would be this wall render, if you prefer to actually have some form of interaction in there with these pieces, which is a possibility. You can also set up a different padding setup as well on there, so that the padding is kind of eroded in a little bit, so there's no weird interactions. I'm going to leave it for what it is. I want you to notice that I'm going to change an expression before I finally do a bake on this. You can see these rocks are still falling after the fact, so it's almost like they're still emitting. So even though we did choose a frame, I forgot what frame we chose, where we said less than to stop, but I'd like it to stop at around 40, maybe even 39-ish. I don't want it to keep emitting like it's emitting or spraying out rocks. So kind of keep that in mind. Maybe 39. Let's go ahead and shoot for that. So, and that's the case, I come back to my debris sim, and I'm going to put this back to the start, and I'll come over here. If you want more rocks, just increase the impulse count. But if you increase the impulse count, you need to come into your debris and set up this attribute here to the same number. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just come in here and set this expression. Instead of 50, I'm going to choose the frame. Let's go with 40. It's less than 40. There we go. So with that expression ready to go, we're going to bake this for real now. So I'm going to go to my debris in the same process as we did before. I'm going to create a ROP geometry. A ROP network. Oops, that's not it. There we go, ROP output driver. That's what we want. Okay, so plug that in. And we want to do frame range. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. So instead of hip name, I'm going to call this real small pieces. And that should do it. And again, this is going to go under my hip geo folder. So wherever my file's saved, it'll create a folder called geo, which we already have in there. And that should be it. I think we're good to go. So let's go ahead and bake this. And hit render. And this should bake out. You notice it started at frame 27. The reason why is that it's only at that point that these pieces are actually birthed. So you're probably wondering, why did it render frame 0 to 28? So you can see it started there. So it's going to render all the way through to 108. And then we're going to actually use a file merge node. And just like what we did with the big rocks, everything is nicely cached so we can scrub. So I'll just go ahead and get a cup of coffee and come back. Okay, so I went ahead and did the bake. So now I'm going to do a file merge node. And I'm going to go ahead and path the file itself, the real small rocks. And also, just for the heck of it, I'm going to put a null node. Always good and healthy to put null nodes in. Call this my out baby rocks. Put my viewer to those. Now we're no longer running off the sim. So that should have done it. Let's see here if I scrub through. Oops, maybe I gotta get out of here. There we go. Yay. So I'll go ahead and scrub through. And there's our little baby rocks. So again, make sure the rocks are rendering. So jump into your camera, hit the render button, and let's see everything together. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong, right? Always does. Okay, so there you go. Got little pieces. Again, you make the call. If you take a look, we get really close on these pieces. There's, even though the shards are kind of crappy divide, they still look good. So again, just scrub in certain areas. Again, this is all going to get motion blurred. And again, if you feel like you need more rocks or more variation in scale, you can go ahead and do that. But I think the smoke will be, like I said, I got a tutorial coming up. It's gonna just dwarf this in regards to Houdini. We're gonna get into explosions and all types of fun stuff with live action. So again, I'll just let's go ahead and jump to frame 85. Just, look at a couple frames for committing. Obviously, you don't have to commit. You can just go back again, just see how they're looking. And I'm not sure what that is right there. There's always the surprises. Is that actually on the ground? I don't know what that is. Honestly, it could be a shadow. Let's see here. Yeah, so we're getting all these nice shadows on here. Yeah, cool. So, we have our wall, and we have our smaller shards. Okay, in this lesson, we're going to go ahead and go beyond the beyond here. I'm going to go ahead and play you sort of a rough render I did and a quick comp I did. Of course, this is not provided. The comp later on is provided when we get to the finishing line, but this is sort of like a midpoint render just to see how everything sort of melts together. It's a good idea to kind of do that. And we're going to start to see the flaws of the common Voronoi fracture issues that everybody hates. I'll go ahead and play this through. What's really interesting is I showed this to my students yesterday, and it was really, I was like, okay, tell me, here's work I'm working on, what's wrong with this? And they were able to pick it apart with, a zillion different issues that were a problem. And I really try to get them to think critically and to really take a look. So they went through frame per frame and obviously found a whole bunch of flaws. But the big one I talked about earlier was the fact that we have these triangles here. And that right there is the dead giveaway that, we got an issue. That's the interior details with, depending on your frequency and your amplitude, you can get these little artifacts. And I find if you press it too much, you're going to have issues. So there is some inherent flaws with that interior detail stuff. Again, it can work here and there. Your actual normals in the sense of whether or not they were smooth or not, if they were cusp at say 30 degrees, you'll get something very faceted. If it's above it, then you don't. I do like this little chunk right here that kind of pops out. Kind of has that nice feel. But then there's little things like, why is this, this little chip right here seems pretty thin. And then you get these little thin triangles. And overall, the thing that drives everybody nuts when they see this, it feels like we're in the movie Pixels, where everything feels like Kubert's going to show up, where the Voronoi fracture, what it does is it fractures everything in these perfect straight lines, and that's the stuff that drives us nuts. You can see this looks like a stop sign. So we got a series of stop signs being thrown out of here. And we need to like break up this edge, and we also have to deal with the Voronoi fracture for the interior, because you can see the exterior cut for the Voronoi is straight lines, and then the interior cut is straight lines. So how can we sort of break that up so that it doesn't give us this look? The other thing that we're looking at is the need for roughness and so forth in here. I always say your specularity is the unsung hero that always makes something look amazing. And this looks like, if I go ahead and play it all the way through, this feels like something out of a cartoon or something. There's no specular highlights on any of this. I've watched a recent movie trailer, I won't say which, but it's just a major motion picture coming out this summer, and one of my students was one of the leads on the compositing end of it. And I always like poking fun sometimes, but it felt like there was certain scenes where it was like painting-esque. It was really painting-esque. And I was kind of like looking at it like, that doesn't look right. And the best example for photorealism, I think, is definitely Blade Runner 2049. Man, why is that movie not up for Best Picture? I mean, honestly, shoot me in the foot here, but I'd rather pick that movie to win Best Picture than a movie about a bunch of people stuck on a beach. It to me, that was just so amazing. The CG was absolutely amazing. Framestore did just an incredible job. I think there was other post houses that did just an incredible job in that movie. And the specularity, the difference in fog, the different textures of fog, all through deep compositing, they did an amazing job. And the photorealism, big thing is always specularity, having that specularity and clarity and not uniformity that you see. And this is the uniformity I'm talking about. Like, this is the actual outside piece. So these are the inside pieces assigned to the clay, and these are the outside pieces assigned to the just the regular texture of this wall. And you can see that the specularity is not very unique. There's no specular change here. There's no specularity here. No change in roughness. And specularity in this case is roughness. If something is rough, the light stays there. If it isn't rough, then it kind of has a reflection mirror-like look to it. Also, I have no occlusion pass burned into this. This is a occlusion pass we're going to actually render. Obviously, right here, we need to put some sort of bank back here, so that we see a picture of the interior of the bank. And also, you got to think about lighting, too. I mean, yes, light would get in here, right? But what's happening is the HDRI is actually lighting. You kind of take a look, the HDRI is coming over here and lighting the bright area right here. So you're seeing a brightness here, and then it gets darker. When in reality, if we're in an interior and we're exposed for the exterior and the interior, this should get darker and darker and darker, and then finally it just, obviously dark inside here because we've exposed for the exterior, which is the sun, which is always more formidable than interior lights. You cannot compete with the sun. So again, we are going to use a very interesting technique to do this. You can cut this stuff up any way you want. Go on YouTube or Vimeo, search up Voronoi fracture. You'll find a million different ways to do it. Some people actually will cut out one piece and make one piece inactive, the other piece active, and so they get a sort of like a graduation of kind of a cut in, as opposed to this direct 90-degree angle where it comes out this way and 90-degree in. There's many different ways. There's all types of things. There's displacement edges techniques where you take the exterior edges and displace them and then replug them in. So we're going to do something that's a little bit complex but well worth the time. So I think you are getting to a level at this point where you're like, I really want to go the full range. And also we want to create a bumpiness here in this here. We want to create a bumpiness in this interior. So I have like a rock texture we're going to use to kind of give that a little bit of life. We're going to lay out the UVs for the inside UVs here. and then we're going to give it some life because it's just feeling too fake. And when you do all those little combination of pieces, and the fact that we're going to have little tiny pieces emitted from these pieces, then you're going to see how it's going to start to come to life. So let's go ahead and jump into Houdini. So the first thing we're going to do is completely redo this whole Voronoi setup. And this is going to be, again, quite complicated, but I think you'll get the gist of it. I'm going to try to streamline it as best as possible. Make sure you're at frame 0, so you go ahead and hit this and hit backwards. We're currently referencing the actual image sequence through this file merge. So again, I'm in my wall render here, and I'm going to switch back to the simulation. So I'm going to go back to, we'll set this back to material, which is going to give us that live feed again of the simulation. So we're no longer in the bake simulation. We're going to eventually rebake our ROP geometry, but we're going to do everything from the ground up again in regards to Voronoi. So I'm going to jump back to my object level and go into my wall level here. So we're going to come all the way up here, and I'm going to ditch out on this bowling here because we're going to put in a kind of a formidable brick format, brick pattern with a division node. So I'm going to first off start at the wall here, and I'm going to add a divide node. And I'll put my viewer to that. So I just put my viewer to the divide node. And I'm going to just get rid of all this, say sayonara and all this stuff here. There we go. And with the divide node, I'm going to choose a brick polygons here. And we can go over here to our size. We're going to leave it, let's bring it back to about 0.1. There we go. So we have a pretty heavy amount of division here. And I'm also going to turn off convex polygons so we don't get that triangle. So this technique is actually going to be sort of like crumpling something up and kind of adding divisions and unfolding it again. So what we have to do is first off basically remember or tell the kind of assign off an attribute, a vector attribute that will actually have us remember the original shape of this so that we can come back to it. So think of it as taking a piece of paper, crumpling it up and uncrumpling it. This is a technique I found. It's really interesting, but it's rather, I don't know, it's a little bit complicated. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to create an attribute wrangler. And okay, and we'll just do attribute wrangler here. Oops. There we go. And again, to hook something up, you just drag it in again, and it kind of brings it down the pipe. So I'm going to call this save out form. It's going to remember the silhouette form, where all the points are at in 3D space. And we're going to call this, make it a vector node, and we'll call it init position. That's the name of it, the vector that we created, just a name we've given it. And we're going to choose equals the individual points. Oh, there we go, semicolon. And what that does is assign a group, initial position, and takes all the positions and kind of lays them out. So we're sort of like remembering where all the points are at currently in here. So here's where the fun begins. We're going to create an attribute VOP. And take it. And once again, just drag it on, drag it on. Okay, and with this attribute VOP, we are going to dive in. So you just double click it. Actually, first name it. We'll call it the pre-fracture transform. So this is where we crumple the piece of paper. So I'm going to double click in there, and we're going to add a turbulence noise, that is. And we're going to go ahead and put the point position into position. And for the output, we're going to add an add node. And we're going to add together the original position with the output of the noise. and then our output goes to the output of the sum goes to the position. Now we're going to promote a couple options here, so I'm going to go to the type, hold down my middle mouse button, and click on promote parameter. Same thing with frequency, and the same thing with amplitude. So this is going to promote it up, so it gets a raise, literally it goes up raise one level. So if we pop out of this, boom, we can see that here's the fracture transform, and I'll put my viewer to it, and it gives us this crazy wavy pattern. Now, can you imagine the fun you can have with this as you kind of go through this? So we're going to set this to zero-centered Perlin noise, and you can see with the frequency we can kind of like woo, go crazy with this. So frequency is the amount of waves, and the amplitude is how tall, you know, the waves are. So that's, you can see like whoa, things get crazy there, right? So we'll probably put this at a frequency of like 3, and we'll put an amplitude probably somewhere around 0.38. Let's go 0.4. So it's a very subtle reality here right now. We can probably go 0.5 if we want to. But the gist of what's going on here is instead of having those straight lines that are going to be drawn out for the cuts, you could see the wavery pattern that's in here, and this is the wavery pattern that we want. So if you want to make it more extreme, you can pump up either one of these. But imagine these lines are those new slicers, so to speak. So they're going to have that amount of difference. Now, the more geometry you have, the more you can really pump up the frequency and amplitude because you have more geometry to start with, but then you're going to create more geometry altogether, which might bog you down. So now we're going to do our Voronoi fracture. So I'll go ahead and just type in, again, a Voronoi, good old Voronoi, throw it in there, you know, get it to link in there. There we go. And I'm going to get rid of this old Voronoi here. Get rid of all this crap up until the attribute wrangler here, because this is where we actually turn the, get rid of all this stuff. I'll keep the explode view. Actually, I'll get that later. I'll get it later. Okay, so again, everything goes eventually until we get to the attribute wrangler. If you recall, that's the one where we actually have the active inactive for the edges. So again, we're starting all the way from scratch. So here's the Voronoi fracture, and you know the drill. ISO offset. Oops, wrong one. ISO offset. There we go. Put that through, take a look. Again, it creates a cloud pattern. We're going to want to go ahead and put the uniform samples up something around 60-ish. So it kind of looks like the shape of the object. And then once again, a scatter. And for the sake of speed, we're going to eventually pump this number up. We're going to start pretty small at first. So I'm going to try to shoot for a number like 15 for now, for my count. And then we'll put the scatter through, just like we usually do. And let's take a look at what we got. Now, the divisions that you would see here are still super sharp. You see that? We still have those straight lines, which is not what we want. But we are giving... we're kind of going to be using this as sort of like a driver, this waveriness, to change up our Voronoi. So I'm going to add another attribute wrangler. There we go. And we're basically unfolding this or uncrinkling this piece of paper back to the way it was, which it's going to take these straight lines and actually make them jagged. Sounds pretty weird, but that's how it works. It's kind of a trick. It's a little bit of a trick. So the expression that we have for that is take the points, all the points where they're at, and conform them back to what we defined as a group, which is initial position. So we had back here we had the points saved out to where they properly are. Right, this is where they are. So when we get here, we unfold the actual points, as you can see here. And if we take a look now, check it out. See that? See the lines are a little bit shakier. Now we can change up our pre-fracture transform here with the frequency and so forth. So like, you know, if I increase this, see how we start to get more dramatic lines in there? It's kind of hard to see, so what I'm going to do is add a normal node for now. So I'll just go ahead and make it normal and stick that in there. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and choose, yeah, let's go ahead and choose outside for now, and we will put this down to 30 or whatever. So there we go. Now there's some artifacting going on. We're going to take care of that, but you can see what's going on here. That now that we've unfolded that crumpled up piece of paper, we're getting nice jagged edges that are unique. Now we're getting some weird errors here that usually has to do with your amplitude. So if you come back here, you can start to either your frequency or amplitude. So if I start to bring this down to say 3, you start to bring your amplitude down, those artifacts will go away. So you can see here we're getting some weirdness here. So I'll probably, do that. Let's play with the frequency a little bit. See if bringing the frequency down pretty low. See, the closer we get to 0, the more it goes back to the way it was. So it can be a little bit obnoxious sometimes. See if we can kind of, let's put this to a value like 0.40. And let's try 39. Let's bring the frequency down a little bit. So sometimes you'll get a sweet spot on this, and sometimes this stuff will render okay for what we're doing. But again, you want to start to define out this line here. So you can see if I take this frequency back up to 3, 3.2, I'm getting a nice jagged looking edge that's a little bit more interesting than what I had. Again, more geometry definitely helps here. So if I come back to divide, it'll kind of help the situation, and we'll come back to this and make a couple of changes and so forth in here. So I probably want to let me go ahead and take my scatter here, and let's crank this back up to something like 30 maybe. We can get just a couple more divisions so you can start to see that nice non-uniform reality. Actually, let's try for 40, see how that does it. There we go. So it seems this artifact, I just keep getting it, these little kind of pieces. So it looks like I'm going to have to take the normals for the inside and the outside. So again, I could just put the group to nothing here, and then it'll basically smooth the normals and everything. Now you still get artifacts in these areas, but this is where you just play around with the amplitude again here. So I'll just come over here to my prefracture here, dial this down, and eventually these nasty artifacts should go away. If you go too far with this, you start to lose that nice juicy edge that you're looking for. Yeah, see, you go too far. So it is a balancing act, and sometimes upon render time you might not see any of these artifacts, but again, it's tricky. So you can see how just cranking this up can get kind of dramatic, and then you can change up your frequency, see if that kind of resolves the issues. It's a bit of a obnoxious, annoying issue. There we go. So I've got like 3, and then my amplitude is like 0.831. So we're getting a couple of strange artifacts right there. I don't know if we're going to be able to see that eventually, but we'll see. Okay, so with that said, again, everything is just problem solving. So I'm going to go ahead and make a explode view, and you're going to start to see some weird issues here. Take my normals view and plug it out and take a look. So if you take a look at the inside here, what's happening is this is the issue that we want to take care of now. We've taken care of the outside edges here, right, as far as the nice curvy edges. But one of the things that's probably giving us all those artifacts is the fact that we have big n-gons in here. That's probably one of the reasons why we're getting that crazy artifact. And the reason being is we need some divisions in here, obviously. And we want to give it, we don't want these cuts to be these perfect lines as well. We don't want these super sharp cuts. So what we're going to do in that case is we're going to separate this outside geometry and the inside geometry. We are going to do our own displacement here on this with the noise, turbulence noise, and then we are going to create 2 different attributes of ID masks and blend between the 2, so that only this area gets affected and then these stay connected but don't change along the edges. So this is where it gets in the nitty gritty, right? So let's go ahead and create a couple blast nodes. So I'll put a blast node here, make a blast node here, and this is the atypical blast node where we separate objects. So if you come here, take a look at the blast node here, we can go ahead and take this side and choose the inside and say delete non-selected. So now we have the inside of the mesh here. Okay. And actually, before we even do that, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and grab this line here and make a remesh node, because we have to actually add some divisions in here. There's no divisions. So we'll put a remesh node and we'll plug our blast nodes into those. Okay. Now you can see we have geometry in here. And let's go ahead and take our remesh node to the average length to 0.1. So that's going to give us more divisions. Let's give it a second. There we go. So now we have some area that we can displace, but we got to be careful about the connection between these two, because that's going to be the fun part. So this area has blasted out kept the inside and then deleted the non-selected. This blast node, put our viewer to that one, will be the outside, and we'll say delete non-selected on that one. So if you kind of take a look at this for what it is, and again, the normals are messed up here. If I go ahead and put this to X-ray or wireframe, you can see that this is the exterior portions, and this one is the interior portions. So I'll put that back to smooth shade. And again, the normals are messed up right now, so it's going to look stupid. So I'm going to go ahead and create an attribute create, because we want to create an attribute color on-off, so to speak. That'll be actually what will be displaced and what will not be displaced. So again, an attribute create, and I'll plug that in, and we're going to call the actual name deform, and the value is going to be basically a value of 1, meaning on. Okay, so we can take this same thing, duplicate it over here, and this one we'll put at a value of 0. Let me go to integer here, there we go. And it'll be deform for being off. Okay, so this one is on, double click it. Values of 1, this one is off. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, drag this down here. And at this point, I think we need to move everything up, so I'll grab these two nodes here and just start to move all this up by holding down Shift and dragging the goods up, so to speak, so we can get some more room here. And at this point, I think I'm going to disconnect this line here and just give me some room here. Give me some room. Here we go. Now we're going to blend these together with a actual attribute transfer node, which allows you to blend the two. And as you can see, there's the transfer from and transfer to. So I'm going to crisscross these guys, like so, and take a look at the options in this. I'm going to turn on primitives, and the thing we're going to be blending is going to be the deform. And we'll go under conditions here, and we're going to set this to blend model. There'll be a certain kind of blend between the two. So I'm going to put my viewer to the attribute transfer. Oh, and it looks like I accidentally deleted my normal node. I don't know what happened to it. Did I lose that guy? Is this him? I don't think it is. I guess it is. Huh. Alright, well, I'll just delete that guy. I don't need him. There we go. And I'll take my explode view, bring it down, and just plug that in here and in there. Alright. One last thing I have to do for the remesh, because I'm getting this weird, is I only want to remesh the interior, so I'm going to put this to the inside. There we go. So that now that I come to the normal, it should look fine. And then we'll do the explode view. And as you can see, we don't have anything set up yet because we need to merge together the two. So again, I'll bring my normals down a little bit, as you can see here, and we will do a merge. And I'm going to merge together this attribute transfer and the original inside here. There we go. And then we'll put that through to our normal. And now you can see we got the two pieces of geometry have been brought back together again. So if I take a look at this with smooth wireframe shaded, we now have geometry that matches the topology of this edge, but we have basically defined two groupings for each side in the process, and we're going to use a visualizer to show the fall off between the two. And the name of the game is we want to have like a masking so it only displaces the areas of the interior, not the exterior, unless we want to. So anyway, with that, we're going to go ahead and create another attribute VOP. We're doing the same thing again that we did as far as crunching up the geometry earlier. So again, I'll just attribute and come to attribute VOP. Throw that right there. And we'll call this the distort interior. This is where we go to do damage, so to speak. And this is the same thing again. We did the exact same thing before. We are going to go double click in here. Same thing again. We are going to go ahead and create a turbulent noise, right? We're going to do an add. Okay. And same thing again. Points to position. Noise output to the input, and then we add it back onto itself, and then we sum it out. Okay. And we're also going to come over here, and here we're going to create a couple of attributes to define the fall off of the interior and exterior displacement. So we're going to require a fit node, a fit range node to be more precise. We're going to plug that into the amplitude. Okay. And let's see here. I also got to plug in this to position here. Okay. And then with the type, we're going to go ahead, click middle button, say promote parameter on the type, and once again promote parameter for the frequency. The amplitude is going to be controlled over here. So we have over here a dest min, dest max. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, say promote parameter, click this one, promote middle mouse button, click promote parameter, and we can double click these to pop them out. So you can see we have both of them here. We're also going to create a bind node. Click it right there, and we're going to take the take the bind node, and we're going to actually make the actual name of the parameter. So we'll call this the deform. And you can see now it's called deform on here. That's going to be the value we're entering. So we're defining the deform value here. And last but not least, for the dest min, for the label, it's just a label we're calling it. It can be called anything. That's the minimum amplitude, and this one will be called the max amplitude. You can name it whatever you want. So let's kind of get this nicely organized here, kind of see what's going on. So now if we go up a one, go back to the wall here, we want to take the distort interior here and switch it over to zero center purlin noise. As you can see, we're not seeing anything. I believe I forgot to switch this from 1D to 3D noise. So go back into your interior, distort interior, come over to your turbulence noise, and it has to be set to 3D noise. So there we go. So we'll pop back here. So this is basically the merge together of both. So if I go to my explode view here, you can see we now have a wave repatterning on the inside here. And in this case, we can start to visualize this with a visualize node. So I'll just type in a visualize node, and we'll stick that just between the explode. And for the visualize node, under visualizer, bring this down a little bit, we're going to visualize the deform. And we're going to do a ramp attribute, and I'll just move this down here, and I can see the ramp color. I'm going to get rid of white here, hit the delete key on this guy, and I'm going to take this color and make it green for basically the area that'll be deformed, and this area I'll make red or orange or whatever you want. Let's see here. Let's go with red. And we'll come over here and say we'll use this to min to max. So there's our ramp, set to min max. And there we go. So we got a visualization here, and now we're going to go into our distort interior here. And let's go ahead and start playing around. So you can see I can play with the frequency, but it's also changing up the edges here. So I think I might have, I probably switched these. It should have been the other way around, but that's okay. We can just take the min app and take this value here. And you can see the min app is basically going to come up. Like you can see the distortion going back and forth. In fact, I think I should put the visualize. Put that after the explode view here and look through it there. There we go. Just make sure my color information is correct here. Okay. And I believe the thing I forgot to do is under the attribute transfer, let's go ahead and just call this the blend weight. We'll come in here, and it's my distance threshold and blend width. So I actually need a blend width in here. So I'll put that to about 0.1-ish. And I'll put my distance threshold about 0.1-ish. So now you can start to see what's going on here. So long and short of it, if we go over here to our distort here, you can see we have a minimum amp and max ramp. So this blend weight, let's go back to the blend weight here. Let's play with this. Now you remember red is going to represent the area that is not going to be deformed, and then the green is going to be the area that is going to be deformed. So you could already see what's happening here. These edges are already starting to meld a little bit, but if I take the setup here for the distance threshold and start backing that up, you can see that it's basically, let's see if we can kind of get this, see if I can play with this blend here. Yeah, there we go. And now if I go back into my distort interior, I think it's because I have these switched, so I'm going to make this value bigger than the other one. See if that does it. So you can see I don't want any displacement there. Oh, this is actually just pumping up the, but we're still getting this blend here. So let me go back to my blend weight here. And start to, as you can see, that's kind of shrinking it. And I can't go any further than that, it seems. So see if I can play around with this here. You know what I'm going to do? I think I'm going to invert these. So I'll take this one here and this one here. See if that does the trick. No, it doesn't. Yeah, that's what I figured. And then for the merge, I'll get rid of this line. Transfer that. There we go. Okay, so there was an inversion. Sorry, guys. I'm sure you're like, oh my gosh. So put that inside there. Merge, distort. Now when we come into our blend weights, we can go ahead and kind of play with this a little bit. So threshold, there we go. So we pull that in, and the blend width is basically the fade off. Okay, and this kernel function is different styles of fall off. Okay, so some of them are maybe linear, some might be logarithmic. But you can see what's happening. It's the red is holding out or maintaining the shape here, but and then you can see the edges. So there's a lot of really cool things you can think about in this in respects to animation. Say you blew up an item and you didn't want to have these sharp edges when these items fall. You could technically come in here and animate after the explosion of the wall hits this actual distance threshold and so forth, so that you can have, like, you can inverse it or whatever. So I think, whatever, let's kind of keep that roughly right there. We want to make sure that this is absolute red along these edges, or else we're going to get seams throughout this process. So now that we've isolated the area for what we're going to do, I'm going to come over here to the distort interior here, and this is where we can start playing with frequency in this. And what I like to do when I judge this is I go to smooth shade mode and I just look at it, and I'm looking at the normals. Am I seeing faceted edges and so forth in here? So like right here, there's some faceting. Does that mean my frequency is too much? So if I bring up my frequency, if I bring up the max amplitude here, okay, and this should be is, you can see how you can even do min amplitude. This is what you could actually animate if you wanted to actually distort the edges of this a little bit after the impact, okay, which is kind of cool. So after the impact, when these pieces finally fall to the ground, they don't have this perfect, flat surface. They've been dented by smashing to the ground. So one of these, like I said, if you come in here, the min amp you can play with, but the max amp, this is where you can kind of play with the distortion here, and then of course the frequency. So kind of play with that. So again, let's see if we can kind of get something that doesn't look faceted but still has a nice edge to it. Now this also has to do with the smoothing of the normals too. So if you come over to the normals edge, we're at 60. If I take this back to like, 0, see how faceted this looks? So it's a combination of playing with the amplitude and adjusting your cusp angle to get, obviously get too crazy with this. It starts to look nasty. So, and again, as far as the groups are concerned, I could probably just do the inside and then do another normals for the outside. So I'll do another normal and make this normal the outside. And obviously with the outside, you're probably sticking somewhere around 30. And then the inside normal you can play with. See that? So this stays put, very sharp. And then we can kind of just play with this, smooth it out to the best that we... And again, look at it, because this is how it's going to render. Now, we're going to be adding some bump mapping onto this, so it should help break up the faceting here. We'll be playing with the roughness a little bit as well, so that'll break up any faceting. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through the process. So again, if I went too quick for this lesson, just, again, go ahead and go with class 20 end and take a look at what I did here, and you can just copy the information or copy paste these nodes if you wish. You can open up two Houdinis, by the way, and just copy paste nodes if you feel like you're too lazy to build all this. So very easy to do. Okay, now that we've done that, we can kind of come to the conclusion here that we'll plug this now in. So we've got this explode view to visualize, and now all we do is plug this straight into our attribute wrangler. And if you guys recall the attribute wrangler, we've locked down this area here, and then we assemble, and this goes to DOPS. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and now play this simulation and see what it looks like. But before we do that, let's just go ahead, actually, now that we've done all of this, I'll go ahead and back to my visualize really quick. We can come back to this the scatter, and now we can ramp this up. This is the point where we've liked the edges here. We'll have a consistency in regards to the nice broken up edges, and then we can come in here and type in whatever number we want. So in this case, I'm going to choose a number of 500. Keep in mind, the different size of the shards might affect your glue constraint system. You might need to loosen up your glue constraint system a little bit as you do this. You can see already I'm getting bogged down a little bit, but now we have all these pieces. So there you go. And again, you could cluster them if you wish, but look at the pieces different than what we had before. You can see that this is not the Cubert, pixels pieces that we had. And again, you can go into your Voronoi at this point. If you want to, you can start. I would not turn on interior details because you've already added that, but you might be able to. I haven't played with it though. You can go to cluster and start clustering these pieces if you wish. So let's see what happens when we do cluster pieces if we get errors or something. Just give it a couple seconds here. So there you go. So we've clustered a couple of pieces together. I don't see this being a big deal. Actually, it looks pretty nice. We got some nice clusters in there. And again, by clustering, you combine pieces, and you actually get a less point or pack point count, which will speed up your process. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and pop out of the object mode, and we're going to go ahead and watch this sim. And again, what's also good to do, because you might have to go back and play with the amplitude, is to keep an eye on the edge here. You can see we got a couple of little flaky objects here. That might be a render issue. We might have to ramp down our amplitude, or take our remesh and add more divisions. That's what's causing this. Probably more divisions on the remesh is what's going to clear up these issues, because it's a sort of like a clash between the poly count on the outside versus the inside. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this through, not all the way. We're going to progress through this, and I'm going to go ahead and actually let's jump. Let's see here. Yeah, we should be good. So let's go ahead and just see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and look through the camera. There's Jack again. Hit the play button. Let's see what happens here. Again, you can see we got little flickery pieces here. At this point in time, I might stop it, see how it looks with the pieces all together. So again, I'll just come over here to my camera and hit a render quick button, see if I see artifacts. If not, I'm going to go ahead and jump in there and fix those. And just let it render. So there's Jack, and commonly, I'll go ahead and click here and turn on my background so I can start to see. Again, my color is going to be off. I am getting a little bit of a issue there. That could be anything. Could be bird crap. Who knows? you can go in and figure it out. So you just want to look for any strange artifact on here. Color correction. A lot of this color correction, even though it doesn't match, I'm going to use position point masking to kind of get into it. So that's looking okay. I'm not seeing like little crevices or cracks in here. So again, what I'll do is I'll hit stop. I'll come back to my scene node. Let's play and progress it through a little bit more. Now we haven't dealt with the interior pieces yet, as I talked about, where we're going to add roughness maps and bump maps and so forth. So we'll be jumping into that before we finally rewrite out our bake. So again, I just want to see if my glue network's too strong. Your glue network always changes as the amount of shards change, so just be aware of that. You might have to loosen up that. You might have to loosen up the pieces and so forth. And you can see some of these chunks actually look a little bit bigger now, so I might want to dial back on the cluster. So again, just give it a second here. Again, as you can see, we're getting nice organic pieces. The clustering is kind of getting different sizes here, which is nice. But I have a feeling our glue is too strong here, so we're going to have to loosen up the glue a little bit. So I think before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. Again, this can get a little bit crazy, so to stop things, you just kind of click, 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 click. Because the computer's just like, oh, you know, and you just got to hit the stop button here, and I'm going to wait until this finally stops, because the simulation is cooking. And when we cook this thing, it will be a lot faster and so forth. But I always like to do a progressive render through this to see how these pieces look. To see how much pieces are coming out, if I have to loosen the glue enough, because I want to get a pretty, I don't want to have pieces lingering. I want to actually have a hole in there. Okay, so I'm going to go to render really quick, and again, I'm just going to do a quick render. We're going to slowly start seeing this progress, and really I'm looking at the idea of the size of the actual shards versus the... that looks looking pretty good. You can see how nice, again, we haven't added a bump map yet for the interior, so it's still looking a little bit faceted. As you can see, the pieces are looking pretty dramatic here. Yeah, I might want to dial down on the clusters though. That might be something to think about. Pieces are still pretty big, as you can see, and I could also make my shard count to 600 or something. I think what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and stop this here, and I'm going to hit this reverse button back. And we're going to do a couple things. What we're going to do is go back to object level. Let's go back to our wall, and I'm going to put my viewer to the attribute Let's go back to my scene view here. Go back to my attribute wrangler here. And here you can see the setup of the, let's see here, let's go to the connect adjacent, and you can see the search radius. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Bring my max count down. Weaken this up a little bit if I can, just a hair. Okay, and then finally I'm going to come back here to my, let's see here, let's go to my Voronoi. And I think I'm going to turn off cluster pieces. I can bring the size down if I want. Just want to see what happens if we turn off cluster pieces. I mean, we're going to get more roundy-ish, round pieces. So I'm going to go jump back to my, go to my wall sim, and go to my glue connections, and I'm going to half the strength to something around 5,000. This is something you got to play with and tweak with. I think of Sam Kreider. He was a guy I worked with over at NetherRealm. This was a sim guy that would put away in an office for like half a year, sometimes a year, and just get to work on simulations for our cinematics for our video games. And he always would produce great work, but it took time. We literally just put him into an office, put him in a room, and said, way to go. And progressively through each Thursday, we had dailies in the theater, and we used to watch him slowly build up huge atmospheres and storm clouds, and it was pretty cool, though. But he was very meticulous, very precise, very methodical. So some of my war stories. So let's go back to the object level here, and let's resim this puppy. So I'll go looking through the camera again, and hit play. So I'll pause this until it shows up. So there you go. You can see the sim is moving. We got these pieces that are flying. They're not locking in too much. And my goal again is to get a hole in the wall that is big enough to see through it. That's what I want, because I want to look into that bank. And when you get to frame 34, 35, you might find it start to slow down a little bit. So don't freak out, whatever. So we're getting nice clusters here. We're getting the geometry here is looking really. The amplitude and frequency are pretty high, and these chunks look like molten lava rock or something. So you can also dial that down. You can see we're getting nice chunks in here. These pieces are falling down, and I think we are very close to ready for a bake. Now in the next video, we're going to go over the material fix on this. So I'm going to go ahead and find a frame that I like. So I'll wait till some rocks fall down here. Should I tell you guys an industry story? Because I never worked in the industry. I worked in the game industry. I tried many times to get into the visual effects industry, and I've done a few gigs, but it just seems like I was born to teach, and I see that in my students too. Some of them were born to draw. Some of them were born to be concept artists, yet they're trying to be something that they're not. Now, that's not saying that I don't do visual effects work. I do it more of an independent level, oddly enough. But, hey, whatever comes my way, I'll do it. I think everybody can do stuff. It's just a matter of time and so forth, and, just working at it. It does require a lot of work, though. I mean, today, if you want to call yourself an artist, you better work for it, because there's too many artists out there. Way too many artists. Not enough hard workers, I think. I've got so many students that, I love them, but it just seems like they're not. They've grown up in a video game world, and they're expecting results to go fast. And when you're in simulation, forget it. I mean, this stuff takes time. It really takes time. It's not something that is done overnight. So I am liking my simulation here. You got to watch out for weird anomalies with this geometry that might, tip your audience off to something weird. In other words, you might see a piece that'll spin. Some weirdness in the simulation, especially when you do clusters. Clusters can, if you don't set the concave convex correctly, you can find intersecting geometry. That's a biggie. So just be aware of that. So you can see when things get crunched or tight, simulation slows down, and then finally it starts kicking in a little bit at the end here. So I think I could see through there, unless that's a solid wall there. I don't know. If that's the case, it'd save me a lot more work. But I wanted to put in compositing, I wanted to put like a background image of a bank or something back there, something within the interior. So I'm assuming that's a hole. There we go. I could be wrong. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's the wall. Should be the wall. I think it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit stop. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop here. And at this point, before I commit to baking, I actually want to, first off, see how this render looks. And then second off, we're going to start adjusting the materials in here. We're going to actually lay out the UVs of the geometry here, of the inside. And then you get to do some fun with the UVs inside this program. So there we go. I think it's stopped. You got to wait a second. You have to be patient. Go to render view. And again, just keep simulating this until you get what you like. Okay. So just back up a little bit here. Get that spinning cycle there. There we go. So we got the back wall. And look at the detail. I'll go ahead and click my button here so I render only a specific area. So you got nice cracks and crevices in there. The rocks feel real. We don't know. We're no longer in Goofy land. You know, like I said before, these edges, look how nice and beautiful these edges are. I mean, this is the good stuff. The only problem is we need Hulk with his hand bashing through the door here. So you got to look like how close is this stuff getting. And I'd say I'm pretty happy with this. So what I'm going to do is, before I do the bake, I want to actually do the UVs on this as well. So in the next tutorial, we're going to go ahead and jump into that. So again, I'm just basically simulating this, but I haven't baked it yet, and I'm ready to start playing around with the materials. And I'm going to use this frame specifically, frame 84, which I stopped on to do all that.